Prime Minister Justin Trudeau says he accepts the recommendations of the inquiry into missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls. And that includes the findings that actions have amounted to a genocide. So what is genocide? The inquiry based its position partly on the UN's 1948 definition. It says it is any of 5 acts committed with the intent to destroy in whole or in part a national, ethnical, racial, or religious group. The acts are killing members of the group, causing serious bodily or mental harm to members of the group, deliberately inflicting on the group conditions of life calculated to bring about its physical destruction in whole or in part, imposing measures intended to prevent births within the group, and forcibly transferring children of the group to another group. Now, some who've studied genocide up close are concerned about the use of the term in the report. That includes General Romeo Dallaire, who lived through the one in Rwanda in 1994.
Is that an act of genocide? I got a problem. Is it deliberate? Do we want that to happen? Is that what our government wants to happen?
Clearly, the violence against them, and I spoke about this as a member of parliament, has been horrific and continuing and must be prevented and protected against. But that particular set of actions I would not characterize as in and of itself being a genocide. I think we've got to guard against using a term which has a specific and singular understanding in international criminal law with great care.
For more on the ongoing debate on the word genocide, I've reached the lead lawyer who wrote the inquiry's 43-page analysis of using the word genocide. Fannie Lafontaine is the Canada Research Chair on International Criminal Justice and Human Rights, and she joins us from Montreal. So, Fannie, thank you for joining us. First,
thank you, Andrew.
What are some of the main things that went into the analysis of justifying the use of the word genocide?
Yeah, well, the commissioners, throughout the evidence that they heard throughout the mandate, came to, and this is what the chief commissioner said yesterday, came to the sort of unavoidable conclusion that genocide was basically the root cause, explaining violence against women leading to murders and disappearances. And so basically the genocide in Canada should be understood in the particular lens of colonial genocide, which is not a traditional way of understanding genocide. And I was hearing Erwin Cutler and Romeo Dallaire, whom I, of course, highly respect and admire their work, and we also collaborate on a number of issues. But this understanding of genocide sees genocide as the prototype of the Holocaust or of the Rwandan Tutsis, so as killings, massacres in a certain period of time. But the genocide term in international law, but also in its history, encompasses much broader actions. You mentioned the list of acts, so there's a number of non-lethal acts that can be committed. And the colonial genocide is a particular one because it spans centuries, it spans decades. It's not accusation that the current government wants to destroy Indigenous people per se. It's the entire sets of actions and a mission throughout history, and including today, that creates basically a policy of destruction that is undeniable, that explains why it can be encompassed within the definition of genocide in international law. But it is not a traditional way of understanding it. It's not a radical interpretation. It's an interpretation that fits the definition, that fits the true nature of the act of genocide committed by the state in this case, but it has to be understood not to belittle what happened in Rwanda and the Holocaust. To the contrary, it's not the same nature of actions, it's not the same governmental actions at all, but it still fits within the definition, and it serves as a basis to understand why there is ongoing violence and discrimination against Indigenous peoples, and particularly women and girls.
So what do you say then to Erwin Cutler, a former Attorney General, to Romeo Dallaire, a former general who witnessed what happened in Rwanda? What do you say to them as they express their discomfort with the use of that word in this context?
Yeah. No, well, I like to all Canadians and those who want to understand what the Commission, the National Inquiry's analysis is on genocide, I really invite them to read the legal analysis, which exactly explains how colonial genocide, as it's happened in Canada, differentiates itself from the types of genocide that we're usually associate the definition with. So this is basically a different set of understanding. One thing is this genocide in the inquiry, we're not looking at individual criminal liability, like the Rwanda tribunal has done, like we've done in Nuremberg after the post-World War. This is not individual criminal liability. No one accuses individuals of this. This is an act of state. This is policies spanning decades that aim at destruction in varying ways with different mobiles, but with the similar intent of destroying Indigenous peoples as physical groups sometimes in different parts of history, but also as social units. So our understanding of genocide is based on social sciences and legal analysis of the term, which basically explains how the interpretation of genocide as being limited to the kind of mass killings is not in accordance with the definition, which actually encompasses a broader term. So there's legal debates, and I welcome this. And I think there are very legitimate legal debates that can happen. This is why the legal analysis is there also to just explain the National Inquiry's position and to create that discussion in Canada. We shouldn't be afraid of the word genocide. This is not, there is a lot of stigma attached to it, and this is very understandable. But apart from those moral questions and the emotions that this create, there is an actual legal discussion that can happen, and reasonable people can have different opinions, but I invite those who look at the act of genocide as an act of state and to look at how a gender analysis and an interpretation of the term, as we have done, allows for qualification of the colonial violence as genocide.
What do you make of the fact that the Prime Minister's comfort with using the word genocide in this context seems to have evolved over a 12-hour or 24-hour period? He says now that we accept their facts, including what happened amounts to genocide. But he did not say that at the ceremony where he was presented with the report yesterday. He said it later in the evening, and then today he said it again. But what do you make of that evolution?
Well, I don't know. We would have to ask them. Obviously, the legal analysis was published online, a little bit before the ceremony. So there are a lot of comments that we heard since yesterday and a lot of reactions that didn't take into account the legal analysis. So obviously, this probably, and this is not to, but I think it may explain some of the reactions, and not just the Prime Ministers, but including Roméo Dallaire, who reacted à chaud, very as the commissioners were speaking, but he didn't get the benefit of reading the legal analysis. So that may explain that. There's other options, but what I think we should all be very proud of being Canadians today. Why I'm saying this? Because this is not an admission of guilt. This is not about individual guilt as non-Indigenous peoples feeling guilt or Indigenous peoples feel as victimized. This is exactly what I think. This is a historical moment coming from this of division, okay, and moving towards with a common acceptance of the foundation of the current problems, and moving forward with the same understanding. So the admission, the acceptance today by the Prime Minister is significant. We should be proud on the international stage. It's not about, finding Canada similar to the Nazis. It's not that at all. It's understanding that colonial policies over decades had the intent to destroy Indigenous peoples, and now we're recognizing this, and with that recognition comes also a recognition of the legal obligations stemming from international law that includes reparations, and reparations in this case, because the ongoing policies, it's cessation. So that means that genocide needs to end, and for that, the National Plan of Action that the inquiry has been called for, all the recommendations of previous commissions, if they're implemented and they're done in a National Action Plan in full collaboration with Indigenous peoples, that will lead to the ending of an ongoing genocide. And I think that is, we should be very proud of this, upholding human rights for real and be an example for the rest of the world.
What do you think it means to Indigenous people? What do you think it means to women, Indigenous women and girls in this country, or the families of those who were lost?
Well, we should ask them. And this is, I think, what we saw, and I think CBC and Radio-Canada have played a good role in this, is Indigenous voices are more present than ever. And they have opinions to share and things to say. The only thing I can say about this is that it is harsh for everybody to think about this word. This is, I think, why the understanding of it needs to move away from the typical sort of mass massacres. This is not it. It explains a lot of things. But one of the things that the commissioners, this is their conclusion. I helped them frame and with my colleagues, Amanda and Kathleen, we helped them frame their analysis, but this is their findings. This is what they heard throughout the testimonies and the evidence, that everything that links to violence against women is linked to these colonial policies spanning decades that are a genocide as a fundamental root cause of current violence. So this is their conclusion. It said it was inescapable. They had to take it. So we just have to trust that they couldn't say otherwise. It's not an easy word to say. It's not. This is their choice, and I don't know how Indigenous groups will use it. But one thing is, I think if we agree that the term genocide can encompass the colonial violence that of the past and the current ongoing discrimination and violence and intergenerational consequences of the violence, then it's a real path to reconciliation. So it's not a division, and we really move forward with the same understanding of on what Canada as a nation was founded and how we can move forward.
Fannie, it was really interesting getting your insight on this. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Fannie Lafontaine is the Canada Research Chair on International Criminal Justice and Human Rights.